Let me preface my introduction to Yang Mu the poet with a brief note. That is, in addition to being a poet of the first order, Yang Mu is also a master of prose, a professor of classical Chinese poetry and comparative literature, a translator of Shakespeare and Yeats, among others, and an editor of town poetry and modern Chinese poetry and prose. By the way, as a professor, Yang Mu has refused to teach his own poetry. In fact, he has refused to teach modern Chinese poetry as a whole. That just shows you how modest he is. So Yang Mu began publishing poetry at the age of 16, first in his high school journal and the local newspaper, and soon in the leading journals in the capital, Taipei. From 1960 to 2011, he has published 14 books of poetry, the bulk of which is collected in 3 volumes. Writing under the pen name Ye Shan, Yang Mu's poetry in the 1950s and 60s was distinguished by its deft fusion of Chinese lyricism, European romanticism, and international modernism. While he took a deep interest in the avant-garde movements in Europe and America, he never blindly followed any of these trends, but crafted a language evocative of classical Chinese poetry. He was equally inspired by British Romanticism, especially by Keats, whose contemplations on time and memory were to exert a major influence on his work. It would be simplistic, however, to simply label Yang Mu as traditional or romantic. His early work was also modernist in its bold experimentation. In the late 1960s and early 1970s, Yang Mu's poetry underwent dramatic development. It's nothing short of amazing when we consider the fact that while his maturation as a poet took place, he was also pursuing a PhD in comparative literature at UC Berkeley. His study ranged from the Book of Odes and Songs of the South to town poetry and poetics, from Greek epics and Beowulf to Dante, Shakespeare, and Rilke. Immersion in Chinese and Western classics did not turn the poet into a pedantic scholar, with my apologies to scholars in the audience, including myself, I guess, but rather it deepened and sharpened his poetic vision. Yang Mu became fully transcultural in his experiments with subjects and styles. He reinterpreted Chinese culture by offering new perspectives on Confucianism, heroism, and fate. Virgil, Marlowe, Federico Garcia Lorca, among others, appeared in his work of this period as well. In the suite of 4 poems dedicated to Lorca, musical images contrasted the permanence of art with the impermanence of love. Music, with its organic structure, intrinsically abstract and amoral nature, is not only a major motif in Yang Mu's work as a whole, but it is integral to his poetics. Since the 1970s, Yang Mu has also found in poetry a means of intervention with social and political reality. Etude, The 12 Earthly Branches, is a dramatic monologue in which an American soldier serving in Vietnam addresses his lover at home. Structured around 2 sets of astrological signs, Chinese and Western, this sequence fuses sexual ecstasy with the despair of war. Yang Mu's 2011 collection is in fact titled Intervention. The opening poem appropriates medieval European tale of the heroic knight and the damsel in distress to reflect on engaged art. The poem ends on a soft syllable, suggesting ambivalence and perhaps even skepticism. There is no ambivalence or skepticism, however, when it comes to his identity as a Taiwanese poet. Through Yang Mu's eyes, we see the majestic mountains and the Pacific Ocean in his hometown, Hualien. We re-examine the colonial history of the island. We share his indignation at injustice and his sheer delight in the natural curiosity of children. The poet also looks to Ireland, Yeats' Ireland, as a frame of reference for and an emblem of Taiwan. Yeats remains a shining role model for Yang Mu, who too must come to terms with the choice between political commitment and aesthetic detachment, between action and intervention through the medium of art. Yang Mu is a supreme craftsman. His deep engagement with world literature, culture, and history has given his work a versatility and profundity that is unparalleled among poets writing in Chinese. In my view, not only today, but of the past as well. He has created language that is uniquely his own. It is dense, lyrical, and charged, with a diction that runs the spectrum from the colloquial to the archaic. A syntax that is supple and complex, and a tone that ranges from playfulness to passion and to despair. His poetic vision may be summed up with these words from the preface to his 1995 collection of poetry. Poetry is that which, I quote, passes through time, traversing its dimness, uncertainty, and fragmentation, gathers and stitches together all the transient moods and reticences to make it lasting in an ever-renewed structure. For more than half a century now, Yang Mu has been a formative force, and the most influential figure on Taiwan's poetry scene. He's widely read in Taiwan, Hong Kong, and other Sinophone communities around the world, and his readership in mainland China is growing steadily. His poetry has been translated into English, French, German, Japanese, and Swedish in individual volumes. To conclude, since his teens, Yang Mu has been a firm believer of the Keatsian aphorism, beauty is truth, truth's beauty. Poetry is worth lifelong pursuit because it is true and eternal. In the poet's own words, and I quote, I believe in the quest and attainment of art and music. I place them in specific time and space. One by one, they burn and diffuse through eternity, end of quote. Yang Mu has produced a body of work brilliant and impressive in range. It is reticent, controlled, yet musical, adventuresome, and linguistically surprising line by line. As readers, we think with him, inside the poem and inside his mind, and we emerge more aware of the world and what it means to be human. Congratulations, Yang Mu.